Welcome to the Hangout Podcast. I'm your host, David Sharetta. Come on in and hang out. In today's conversation, I sat down with Shaka Mitchell. Shaka was raised on Long Island and is now based in Nashville, where he is an education leader, an attorney. His career spans DC policy, leading charter school growth in Tennessee, and now advancing the cause of school choice at the American Federation for Children. In this conversation, we dig into the real menu of choice in the education sector, from public charters to magnets to vouchers, homeschooling, clarifying myths along the way, covering the topics of equity, access, parent agency, and how policy meets the everyday life of a school and a school day. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Shaka Mitchell and his deep reflection, experience, and thinking around education in America. I'm sure you'll enjoy this episode as well. Welcome, Shaka. Thank you so much for joining us today from Nashville and for having this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's really good to be on with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I thought we could start with your origin story, your background, where you come from, and because ultimately that dictates who you are today in the world.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to talk a little bit about that, and I'll try to keep it brief because it's probably the least exciting part of our conversation. But I was born and raised on Long Island, New York, and I guess that kind of origin story is also a little bit of the professional origin story too, because the two things are so closely linked. Where I lived on Long Island, it was in a very much a working class neighborhood, working class and lower income neighborhood in Nassau County, Hempstead. And the schools that we would have been set to attend were low performing academically, unsafe. There's all these stories about Hempstead High School, and anybody who's from Long Island might know some of these stories about Hempstead High School, where just crazy things are happening, like kids setting fire to the carpets and just stuff that goes beyond shenanigans, and really became unsafe. And anyway, so my mom was looking for other options, so I went to one of the local Catholic schools, and with help from the diocese, and this was not like some Tony private school with lots of acreage and whatnot. It was a small school. We had recess most of the time in the parking lot that became the bus lot at the end of the day, and it's a lot of Black and Latino kids, and I would say it made all the difference, right? Like that. Being in that setting, I think made a tremendous difference for the students who were there, for me and my siblings who would also attend there. And then we ended up moving, and we moved from New York to outside Atlanta, to actually outside Marietta, to Powder Springs, Georgia. So you talk about a big cultural shift. We moved from Long Island to Marietta, or to Powder Springs. And that's where I went to high school. I went to a big public high school there. But, we went down there because it was like cost of living was so much cheaper. This is what the early to mid 90s. Cost of living is super cheap. So you go down there, and I really thought that like we had arrived. We lived in a house that was a new construction house in a cul-de-sac. I was like, oh my gosh, this is basically like we're rich. We made it. And it's a lovely home. My parents still live there. But I went there, and my siblings attended those schools. Yeah. And then went to college in Nashville, which is where I live currently. Did law school in North Carolina and was in DC working for a little while in the education sector. And that's where, my wife and I got married while we were in DC, and then eventually moved back to Nashville where I live. And I've got three girls, three school-age daughters who, this very day we'll have, it's the first pep rally of the year. So we're hitting fall, the fall school year. So that's kind of the story.
What role has faith played in your journey? You went to a Catholic school. Was that choice made? I mean, you mentioned the kind of the qualitative change from the, sounds like what was that Michelle Pfeiffer movie, The Dangerous Minds or something, where you have that stereotypical,
Yeah.
the teacher turns their back and stuff starts flying, Nassau County.
That's right. Or like Lean on Me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of a thing. Did the faith part play any role at Catholic school and beyond?
Yeah, I think so. Well, certainly it played a role. I mean, going to Catholic school, I just took for granted the fact that we had religion as a class, like we had math, like we had history. I mean, it was just a class that we had. And first Friday of the month, we marched across the parking lot to mass, and it was just a part of the culture for sure. That being said, not every kid who goes to Catholic school is Catholic, right? I think that's the case for probably most faith-based schools. But I think it did have a big influence. In part, I believe, and I don't know if we want to jump right into this, but I think that for faith-based schools, it's actually easier to have a clear mission. Because if your mission is something like, let's say your mission is something that is indeed tied to the Bible, right? Tied to scripture, tied to the texts that are the tenets of your faith, like that's not changing. As compared to if you are a conventional public school, your mission fluctuates with every school board election, potentially, right? And so you can sort of get whipsawed around a little bit in terms of like, oh, this year we're focused on STEM. 2 years from now, we're focused on reading interventions. 5 years from now, we're going to be focused on high-dose tutoring and social programming and, after school stuff. As compared to, is my belief, as compared to many faith-based schools, I think can just sort of say, like, the mission of Jesuit schools, for instance, hasn't really changed since like the 1600s. Now, other things changed. There's some pedagogical things, but yeah, I think it definitely had an impact on sort of values and culture. And I would say it also personally was really impactful because I knew lots of those stories. I knew lots of those Bible stories. And then later in life, when I would say I really came to faith and embraced Christianity, I sort of had this baseline of knowledge already because I had gone to school for 9 years reading these stories and that I knew as kind of historical, but later on came to really embrace. So
you went to law school in North Carolina.
Yep.
Then you started to work in DC, you said. And so how does law school lead to work in education to then the work you do today? I know there's a full career there, you're still a young man, but a lot of work that you've done. So walk us through kind of the different signposts along the way in that career.
Yeah. So I have a lot of students and like college students who will ask me, hey, what do you think about law school? Because I'm thinking about it. What advice would you give? And one of the first things I tell them is law school is a great place to go if you want to be a lawyer. And I know that sounds like, there's nothing profound about that, but I didn't really have anyone who told me that. So I didn't know any lawyers when I went to law school. I was my parents didn't graduate college. I didn't have a whole lot of folks in my network, small as it was, that had that kind of professional experience. So I kind of went to law school thinking, oh, well, I think eventually I want to work on laws, like
Legislation.
legislation, policy, justice, like big issues, macro stuff. And I thought, well, what do you do? Where do you go? After you studied political science, I guess you go to law school. And I didn't really realize that a lot of people go to law school so that they can do like real estate transactions and, corporate finance stuff. And that's great stuff. And somebody's got to do that. But I knew from the jump that was not what I was most interested in. Right. So I went because I was much more interested in policy, in shaping law and legislation later on. Much more interested in constitutional questions than I was the smaller contractual issues or procedural issues. And so, which, made the first year of law school really challenging because you've got to get through all that baseline stuff before you start asking these deeper questions. But I do think it was still a great way to kind of sharpen my writing and my research skills and kind of critical thinking skills. I think law school is still really, really good for that. And so I did that and then was like, yeah, I think education was just kind of the passion for me. I just thought, man, if we get education right, how many other things downstream will improve? If we get education right, think, K-12 education, will we have better health outcomes? I think so. Will we have better outcomes in the criminal justice, sort of system? I think we will. Will we have better economic outcomes? Yes. And so to me, education was something close to like a first principle. Like, let's work on that and then reap some benefits later on.
So what was your first step in moving into the education realm?
Yeah, my first step was going to DC, and I worked at a place called the Center for Education Reform, which was as the name indicates, kind of an all-encompassing ed reform policy shop. And I'll say this, it was a really good time for me to get to DC. So this is 2004. And as you'll remember, No Child Left Behind Act was passed in 2001. And so by 2004, this is about the time when the teeth of that law were starting to kind of come into effect. People sort of forget and maybe begrudge that law a little bit, but prior to that law, like, we didn't have good data. At the school level, we didn't have good data, certainly for like subgroups within schools. It was like, we'd say, is that a good school? And people would say, oh yes, that's an A school. How do you know? Well, the kids are happy and they have a baseball field. Okay, that's not great data, right? So No Child Left Behind passes, and all of a sudden, for the first time across the country, you had schools that were deemed failing schools. And then the question is, well, what do we do? And so that's when I was coming into, my career in this education reform space. So it was a really good time because as an answer to the question, what do we do about these schools, people were thinking about charter schools and district to charter conversions. People were thinking about vouchers and private choice programs, teacher performance pay, just all sorts of different things. And so I think it was a really exciting time for me to enter that space, and really got my eyes open to a lot of things at that point at the federal and kind of state level.
So you worked there, and then talk to us about your transition into more specifically the charter school sector, the work you've done specifically, and then your work around school choice writ large.
Sure. Sure. So, I think my first exposure to charter schools was when I was in DC. I started meeting founders of various charter schools. DC has a large charter school community. I mean, I think something like 50% of DC schools now are charters, and even back then it was a higher percentage than most other places in the country. So I had a chance to tour schools for the first time and see some of these innovative practices that were happening. I then went and worked for a constitutional firm where we represented families who were looking to participate in choice programs. But we got married. My wife Stephanie and I got married, and knew pretty quickly that we did not want to stay in DC. So as we looked at other places, Nashville was kind of on our short list, and I knew that I still wanted to press forward on education work and education policy, and I was doing some policy work when I first came to Nashville, and for me, the question was less about what educational system, charter, private, etc., and more about, all right, what's at the tip of the spear? And at that time in Tennessee, it was charters. We didn't have a private choice program. We had charters, and we had a new thing was about to start called the Achievement School District. And so I got connected with someone that I had met some years earlier, named Jeremy Kane. He had started a school in Nashville called Lead Public Schools. And he said, hey, we're about to expand. And, as you know, David, he said, I don't know what we're going to need next, but we're going to need some people who can dig in and who are not afraid to work and who can help and who can think in a few different domains. And I was like, sure, let's do it. And so when I started at Lead, we had just opened our second school, which was the first conversion charter in the state. And then we opened two more schools after that in successive years. We opened the first Achievement School District school. So this is a bottom 5% school in the district that converted to a charter. And then after that, I went and I became the first regional director here in Tennessee for Rocket Ship. And so we opened 3 schools with Rocket Ship. And so, yeah, I got to see firsthand both the school day, right? Because I was, officing out of a middle school or an elementary school. And so was really experiencing the school and the school community in a way that I hadn't when I was in DC, right? That's kind of at arm's length. And I think it actually does a disservice if policy people never get in a school building. I think it's, you're necessarily disconnected. So it was super helpful for me to just be on the ground and go, oh, okay, here's what the day looks like. Here's the cycle, the rhythm of a school year and how that informs your policy. And so, it was really, really valuable.
So the concept of school choice is an interesting and nuanced one, and I think often misunderstood. In a minute, you can give your perspective on that. But from my perspective, it's often misunderstood. Having worked now for over 3 decades in charter schools, I every day run into people who mistakenly think charter schools are private, mistakenly think
Right.
that students have to take an exam or a test they have to test in.
Yeah.
They've seen Waiting for Superman, and they have some perceptions about that. Then we have, certainly with this most recent iteration of Donald Trump, but even the previous iteration of Donald Trump, vouchers started to gain legs as an option. I know now several dozen states have some semblance of a voucher or voucher-esque program. Can you kind of take us through the menu of options of things that you're thinking about when you talk about school choice,
Mm-hmm.
like from public, private, vouchers, charter, like how should our listeners think about and navigate that? It's big.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of misconceptions about choice. It requires a good deal of nuance. And, to be fair, part of the reason is because the educational environment looks so different today than it did, 20 years ago, definitely 30, 40 years ago. And now that's not the case in every state, but in a lot of states. I mean, if you think about the educational options that exist in Washington, D.C. today, none of this, you couldn't even fathom this ecosystem, 25 years ago, because you've got a voucher there, the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. You've got charter schools that are thriving. You now have district magnet schools, I believe. So, yeah. So what does it all mean? I think kind of at the core, school choice or educational freedom, whatever the parlance is that you prefer, I think it has to do with who is best positioned to make the educational placement decision for the child. That's kind of to me, that's the most important unit. Who is best positioned to make that decision? To say that a school district is best positioned to make that decision, I think kind of really you've got to stretch reality to say that with a straight face, because I don't know how big the district is in San Diego. Here in Nashville, where I live, our district now, I mean, you've got about 100,000 kids, 110,000 school-age kids.
Yeah, that's what San Diego Unified is about. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lot of kids. I only have 3 in my family. and it's clear that my 3 kids have, different learning styles. They are drawn to different subjects, right? If you're a family and some of your kids have exceptional needs, then that now that's another layer you've got to put on top. So the question is, all right, you do that, and now you multiply those differences times an entire county or an entire city. How is one school board going to make decisions that are in the best interest of every single child? I just think it's impossible. And that's not because school board members or school district employees are bad people. I just think it's like a numbers thing. It's a reality, right? There's too many kids with too many needs to do that. Too many unique needs. So the concept of school choice says, all right, well, let's give some of the decision making then to parents. But what we're going to do is, per state law, because this is the case in every state says that it's going to pay for education. But I think what doesn't have to be the case is that it doesn't mean that it's going to both pay for and provide the education, right? So that's the difference. And it's separating those two things so that we can say, yeah, great. Let's let the city of Nashville and the state of Tennessee pay for education, but we're going to let mom and dad make the decision about where this child should go, because they've got the most direct link, and they've got real skin in the game in terms of what's going to work best for him. That's, I think, kind of fundamentally what's there. Now, policy-wise, yeah, you asked about what are some of the ranges, some of the differences in policies. I mean, this kind of started out, I'll try to hit it quickly, but most people think about private choice as just vouchers. But I think, again, if you think about those the pillars that I mentioned. Who pays for it and who controls it, right? Who pays, who controls, and who sort of provides the education. In on one end of the spectrum, you've got, say, a district, and the district pays for the education and it provides the education, and they tell you where to go, right? They say you live on 24 whatever Poplar Street. This is where you go to school. Period. So you don't have any say in the matter. The other end of the spectrum would be say really homeschool, and would be, all right, family pays for it, family provides it. They're going to figure out what the school day looks like. That's at the other end. Everything else is in the big middle, right? So you've got a charter school where, as you know, as your audience, most of your audience will know, a charter school, not a private school. Why? Because the government still pays, but now you have this independent, usually nonprofit board kind of making the decisions about how to operate it. And who makes the choice? Well, parents make the choice. They say, I want to go to that charter school because it's got a STEM focus, or it's got, it's doing some cool things with English language learners, or, whatever it is. Down the way, then you might have a private school. And again, private schools would be private pay, private placement, but the school itself figures that out. Where a choice program comes in is we say, okay, we're going to take the money that would have gone to the public school, and we're going to let families carry that to whatever option they want. And we're going to, again, trust that parents are the closest ones to the end user, and that is a student. And so that they're going to do what's in the best interest of students.
And thank you for that overview. I think it's really helpful for the conversation and for thinking about this. One of the knocks against school choice, the last descriptor that you used, and I'm sure you've heard this often, is that that's all well and good to be able to take your allocation or allotment of X amount of dollars to wherever you want to go. What happens if that's not enough to cover the cost of a private setting? That's one part of the question. The other part of it is, what happens if we're dealing with a family that just historically, assuming every set of parents loves and cares for their kids and wants the best for their kids, I think that's a good assumption place to start with, a respectful place. But the systemic empowerment that comes with this idea of choice isn't just a default thing for people, right? Like how do you think about both empowering choice for people who very likely have choice in all elements of their lives and exercise it freely, people like you and I sitting here now on this call, and then also people who may not even have ever had to make a choice about education for their kid, and suddenly they're living in a place where that's an option. I think about Texas, for example, right? Governor Abbott pushed super hard, and I think it cost some politicians their jobs in the last primaries, and suddenly there's a thing going on in Texas.
Yep.
But the question is, is that empowering everybody, or is it a select few people like me who might have had my kid in a private school anyway, and now I'm getting a $10,000 discount for that?
Right.
Talk about kind of how you think that through from an equity and access standpoint.
Yeah, great questions. So your first question, what if the scholarship or the voucher or the education savings account, whatever form it takes,
tax break, whatever it is.
Yeah. What if it's not enough? So, one, these things are increasing. At American Federation for Children, where I work, we always push for like a minimum of 70% of the per pupil allocation to be part of one of these scholarships. In Texas, this new law that you referenced, so it just passed in May of 2025, it's going to be about $10,000 per student. Like $10,000, that'll spend,
Yeah.
And here's what I would say about what if it's not enough? Because you're absolutely right that there are schools with tuitions that are much higher than that. But what I think a lot of folks fail to realize is what happens when you inject capital into this ecosystem. So it does a few things. One, it actually allows philanthropic dollars and scholarships, school-based scholarships, to go farther, because schools are not going to stop raising money. You can believe that, right? Schools are going to keep raising money because people get a tax break when they contribute to a school, typically to a scholarship fund. So schools are going to continue to raise money. Now what you're doing is you're allowing a school's financial aid to go further and reach more kids. And I've seen that firsthand in Nashville, where a school told me that they basically had one scholarship that they could give. It was a startup school. They had the equivalent of $14,000 or $15,000 that they could give. They had two girls from the same school who applied, and they were like, man, these girls are great. We want them both to attend. Neither one of them can afford it, right? If those girls had the $7,000 ESA, then the school could have split that financial aid and brought both girls and not have to make that awful choice between one or the other, right? So it allows it to go further. The other thing is, listen, parents, I think we don't give parents enough credit if we think that we've got to cover 100% of tuition. Parents will figure it out and and are savvy enough to come up with a little extra. I don't want to diminish again what it would be like for a low-income family to have to come up with $25,000. That's a lot of money. But you often hear stories of parents saying like, yeah, we had to do something extra, but we came up with that $2,000 to make it work because we got this scholarship, and all of a sudden it worked. On your equity piece, I think it's really important. And again, at AFC, we think it's really important to prioritize lower income families in these programs. And so you can do that in a number of ways. You can, for instance, reserve some seats or some scholarships for low income families. That's one way to do it. You can give priority access during the application process, right? Because we know that wealthy, politically savvy families are going to log in and apply for our program on like minute one, right? So we think if there are ways to open up the application process first to families who historically have lacked that kind of access, that's a way to kind of balance the scales a little bit. So there's some things that you can do from a policy standpoint that keep those communities kind of as a focal point. And then the last thing I would say is I really do think that that choice begets choice. And maybe a corollary to that is that agency begets agency. And what I mean there is that I don't think it should be surprising. I bet you've heard this, David. I bet you've heard colleagues at other schools, especially public schools, talk about, we can't get enough parents out for this parent night, or there's not enough of the right kind of parent engagement. And I would say is, well, how responsive have you been to parents? Because if you're a school that has a history of being unresponsive to parents, why would you expect parents to keep coming out? I wouldn't do that, right? If I kept making comments, dropping notes in the comment box and they went unanswered, I would stop dropping comments in the box. And I would just ignore it and go, well, I guess we can't fix it. I guess it is what it is. The flip side of that is when, and there's a guy out of University of Arkansas that's done some work on this, Patrick Wolf. When families participate in a choice program and they choose a school and it works for them, there's actually some indicators that those families have higher civic engagement after.
Interesting.
And the hypothesis is that, again, like this agency sort of begets agency. And so they go like, hey, I did that, right? I filled this thing out and it worked. And now our family is in a markedly better situation. Okay, what else can I do? Like, who knows? Maybe voting. Maybe that works. Maybe I'm going to engage that way, or maybe I'm going to engage with my, block party association. It doesn't have to be some, really big scale. But I think there's a dynamic there that when you show parents, hey, this works and your opinion really matters and you can make a difference, I think that kind of gets the flywheel going.
I'd imagine that the parent education orientation piece is huge, right? Just understanding the landscape, understanding the terminology. I mean, as I look out my office window, I'm like 10 miles from the border with Mexico. And so a large percentage of our families our students are first generation born in the U.S. or immigrant students, and they're coming from a landscape where there are no charter schools at all in Mexico, and the disparity in public perception between public and private in Mexico is vast. Like, it's like you just do everything you can to escape public. Like, that's a thing. And so we've seen that over and over and over again in our messaging and communication with our community, is like understanding that, yeah, we have uniforms here. We have these expectations. We have these programs, and it doesn't cost you anything. We're free. We're public, and so talk about the work that your organization does in disseminating information about school choice. Because we talk about, again, if you and I are making choice for our kids, we're the dudes logging in at 12:01, making choices, right?
Right.
Because we're closer. You know what you're doing, and I'm closer to knowing what I'm doing, but we don't represent everybody. So what does the parent education side look like?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we pay a lot of attention to. I was just with a group earlier in the summer, and we were talking about this new federal tax credit program that it got passed as part of the one big bill, and it's got the potential to give scholarships around the country. I mean, I think it could be really catalytic. But we were talking about, all right, what might it look like to tell parents about this? And one of the things that I noted, I said, okay, when we're talking to parents, keep in mind that when you start talking to someone about tax policy, it's like automatic shutdown.
The shades come down. Yeah.
Yes. I said, we cannot lead with, hey, let me tell you about this new federal tax credit program. Is like not exciting, right? So I think, and that's not just spin either. I mean, I think it's being responsive to what people are paying attention to. I think educators are often really surprised and maybe even frustrated to see these polls that come out almost annually. Somebody will do a survey and they'll say, what's most important to parents when selecting a school? And, top 3, it'll be like safety, transportation, right? Then maybe number 3 is academics, right? But it's often really, really frustrating because, educators, you didn't go to years of schooling to be a classroom teacher so that you could just have like safety as your highest priority. You actually want to teach content. But again, I think we've got to be responsive to what parents want, because of course parents want a safe school. And so too with these programs, we try to really talk about or identify what's important to families. Some of that's going to be contextual based on what's happening. I mean, for instance, in my city, a lot of people don't know this, but Nashville has a really large immigrant and refugee population. So when we started one of our schools, one of the rocket ship schools, we had a large Egyptian population, student population, who spoke Arabic, a big Somali population, so they're speaking Somali, and then we had a Spanish-speaking population, but you had several, mostly Central American countries. So what did we do? We had to have people on staff who spoke those languages so that we could communicate with folks in the community, and that's something that I think we were early on. We were early to, and district schools weren't as responsive, and I think that goes a long way. So yeah, it's kind of meeting families where they're at.
Like any changes within a system, then while, as you referenced earlier, the options in education are incredibly varied compared to where they were maybe 20 or 30 years ago even. But this is a public education in the United States is well over 100 years old. And for most of that, it was a fairly staid and unchanging or very change resistant. I think it's safe to say that public education continues to be change resistant. I'm sure that you see attacks against concepts of school choice. In the charter movement in a state like California, we face legislative attacks every year. Right? That's one reason we're part of membership organizations. I'm sure you see this in your home state as well as work around the country in various ways. What gets you up every morning to continue this work? I mean, this is work that's not just a straight line, easy movement ahead, right? There's a lot of headwinds against you, depending on where in the country you're working and who you're talking to. Like, there's a lot of this that's thankless too. How do you, as an individual, stay motivated and positive and calm? And again, I thank you for your calm presence. I sense that it comes through the screen, and I know it's going to come through in the audio as well. But what keeps you going?
Well, I think some of that calm is just, as you know, has increased with age. Because I don't know that would have been the case. I think 20 years ago, I'd have been like, burn it down, And listen, I think it takes some of that sometimes, because there are educational situations for kids still in the U.S. where we should absolutely disrupt that system because it's failing kids. I mean, I think about a city like Baltimore. I've got a colleague who's up there, and there were like less than a dozen actual high school students proficient in math, not percentage. Those sorts of things are, I think it's in injustice to graduate kids and matriculate kids, give them a diploma. And you're really just selling them kind of a bag of beans that says, oh yeah, you'll be fine. You'll be fine out there. No, you won't. So I think that's got to still motivate us. How animated we get about it is another question. That's maybe one of temperance. But yeah, I mean, I guess I just know personally and have seen professionally in so many different schools, whether I was affiliated with the schools or just touring other great schools. I believe in the power of education. I believe that if we're going to have meaningful and actionable, like, civil discourse in the U.S. about any number of other important issues, I think we've got to have some shared knowledge. I just saw on social media the other day somebody that I went to high school with. I won't name them, but posed a question about the moon landing, and I mean, there were like 37 comments. There were so many comments that it surprised me. And so I clicked comments, and there were like 37 comments where 90% of them said, nah, that didn't happen.
It was a studio in Burbank or something.
Yeah, it was a studio, and I was just like, oh my goodness, great. So in some ways, like what motivates me, that kind of thing motivates me too, right? Because I think we should be proud of the like intellectual and scientific and academic advancements that we've been able to make. And I mean, we talked about faith earlier. I don't think those things are at odds with faith. I think we've been given, these abilities and frankly, how do you even come to a more defined faith? Well, you read, right? I mean, any faith tradition has got like texts that you've got to actually study. So I think we've got to arm people with the skills to be discerning citizens, and education is just a part of that. And now I see it with my kids, I'm like, all right, what are they going to be? Who are they going to be? And education is such a big part of that.
Well, you've been very generous with your time and your wisdom and your perspective. I really appreciate that. I have one last question for you, but before we get there, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wish to add to this conversation about your work, about your perspective, something that I might have overlooked?
Well, thanks for asking that. And I've enjoyed our conversation too. I mean, I think I mentioned it, I touched on it briefly, but I would definitely encourage folks to keep an eye out for that very unsexy sounding federal tax credit program.
Everyone go on the IRS website right now.
Yeah. That won't start for a little while. It's probably not, it doesn't come into effect until 2027. So, maybe we can bump this up.
What is it? What is it? What's the Reader's Digest version of that?
Yeah. Reader's Digest is that every taxpayer every federal taxpayer, which is all of us, right, who work, or even if you don't work, you can be a federal taxpayer. Every federal taxpayer can contribute $1,700, get a dollar for dollar write-off. So if you have tax liability, instead of cutting a check to the government, you can put $1,700 into a scholarship granting organization.
Okay.
And then those scholarship orgs can give out scholarships to kids in private, charter, public school, even homeschool in some states. That can be used for tuition, for materials, for AP classes or college coursework or special ed services. And so it's got a lot of ability. And the scholarships are not $1,700. The scholarships can be more than that.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask you that. The 17 is just the ceiling on the individual taxpayer's donation limit.
Correct.
To that.
Correct. And this is not a donation. So, normally, right, if I gave a donation to your charter school, I might get like
half or something in
half
benefit.
or 40% of something like that of the credit.
Right.
This is dollar for dollar credit.
Dollar for dollar.
Yeah, 100% credit, which is a pretty big deal. And so, this could be really catalytic, I think, for a lot of families, and those will start to come online in 2027. But here's the rub: governors have to opt in, and so there's going to be a lot of pressure. I know that there was a meeting just last week of Democratic governors, and they're already talking about, hey, on the one hand, they might not have been fans of the big bill. On the other hand, this is a lot of money is at stake if they don't participate. A lot of money could be coming into their state for students.
I'm wondering where organized labor is going to come down around this.
I don't know. It's hard to say. Here's the deal. In a state like yours, like California, even if your governor elects to not participate,
right,
your taxpayers can participate.
Interesting.
So all of your tax,
another state, right?
You're paying into another state. And so if I'm your governor in California, I'm like, why would I want to? You're basically just sending checks to people in other states. Why would you do that? If you're my state, like, and Kentucky's not participating, like, we're happy to run TV ads to the people in targeting the people in Kentucky, saying, hey, by the way, you're going to do your taxes. When you do them, why don't you contribute to education?
Interesting.
Yeah. So that'll be super interesting. That's something to watch.
Thank you for that. I definitely will keep an eye out for that. Okay, the last question of this conversation, and hopefully you and I, this isn't the last time we have a conversation.
Yeah,
I
I would love to link up again. Yeah.
So this is a hypothetical. It's a thought experiment. You're given the opportunity to design a billboard on the side of a freeway or your local highway or throughway, whatever they're called in Nashville. In California, obviously, it would be a freeway. What does your billboard say about your work, about what you believe in? What message do you send to the world?
That's really good. Really good question. The idea that my face would be on a billboard makes me very nervous.
It doesn't have to be your face.
Good. Like, I don't know. Yeah. More like a face made for radio. What would it say? I think, boy, this is going to be too long maybe for billboards.
You can have two.
The fonts, yeah, it had
billboards.
Some of those, yeah, those repeating ones, whatever. Yeah. It's on a couple different exits when you're.
Yeah.
I think it would say something like education, the surest path to the American dream.
Mm.
I think something like that. I think that's right. I think I believe that. I think it's, there's not a surer way to climb the ladder for you and for your family, and there's so many other benefits that come along with it, right? I mean, you see the dignity that comes when kids show you their work that they've worked on, even if it's not perfect. That's a real value, and that comes through the educative process. Those lessons carry out, and I think it has the ability to continue to set us apart as a nation. So yeah, I think education, surest path to the American dream.
Thanks for joining us on the Hangout Podcast. You can send us an email at podcastinfo@proton.me. Many thanks to my daughter Maya for editing this episode. I'd also like to underline that this podcast is entirely separate from my day job, and as such, all opinions expressed herein are mine and mine alone. Thanks for coming on in and hanging out.